For 12 years, my mother, my sister Denise, my brother, and I pooled $5 each every single Friday for the same 6 lottery numbers: my late father's birthday, my mother's, and the date they got married. It started the year after my father died, almost as a joke, my mother saying, only half seriously, that if his birthday was ever going to be worth something, it might as well be worth something to the people who missed him. We were all still raw that first year. And I think, looking back, the ritual gave us something small and manageable to do together every week that wasn't just sitting in the grief, a $5 act of hope that required almost nothing from any of us except remembering to send a payment before Friday afternoon. Denise handled the actual buying because the gas station near her office was on the way home for her and nobody else. She never once complained about it in 12 years. Not really. It became, in its own quiet way, something she took a certain pride in, the reliable one who made sure it happened every week no matter what. She'd send a photo of the ticket to the group chat most Fridays, sometimes with a little joke attached, sometimes just the number circled. It became routine in the most ordinary way possible. $5 each, sent through a payment app every Thursday night. The same 6 numbers every single week, whether any of us actually remember to think about it or not. I want you to understand how unremarkable this had become before I tell you what happened. Because the ordinariness is actually the whole point. Nobody in my family thought of that weekly ticket as an investment or a real plan or anything with actual stakes attached to it. It was a habit, the way some families always order the same pizza on Fridays. We joked about what we'd do with the money maybe twice a year. In a lazy, hypothetical way, people joke about things they've genuinely stopped expecting to happen. My brother used to say he'd buy a boat. He had no idea how to sail. I used to say I'd finally finish my degree without worrying about the loans. Denise, more than once, said she'd take our mother somewhere warm every winter for the rest of her life. None of us, I think, actually believed we'd ever have to make good on any of it. The week everything changed, 3 of us, me, my mother, and my brother, were late sending our $5. Nothing dramatic. My mother had a doctor's appointment run long. My brother's card had gotten declined, and he meant to fix it and forgot. I was just busy and didn't check the group chat until later than usual. Denise, who always bought the ticket right after work regardless of who'd paid yet, bought it that Friday the same way she always did. Same gas station, same 6 numbers, same routine. Except that week, she used her own money to cover it, since the rest of ours hadn't come through yet, fully expecting, the way she always had, that we'd Venmo her back over the weekend the way we did every single other week without incident. Those 6 numbers hit that Friday night for a jackpot just over $4 million. I remember exactly where I was when I got the text, because it is, without question, the single strangest text message I have ever received in my life. I was on my couch, half watching something I don't even remember now, phone face down beside me the way it usually was by that hour. It came into our family group chat at 11:47 that night from Denise, in all capital letters. We won. Oh my God, we actually won, call me right now. I actually laughed out loud, alone in my living room, assuming for a full 3 or 4 seconds that it was some kind of joke, the way you assume anything that sounds too enormous to be real must be a joke, before I saw my mother's response come through half a second later. Just a string of exclamation points and, "Is this real?" in a way that told me she was taking it seriously too. I called Denise within about 90 seconds. She was laughing, crying, barely coherent, saying we, and us, and the family, over and over, genuinely, unmistakably including all of us in a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy that I don't think either of us, at 11:47 that particular night, had any capacity to fake. She kept saying, "Dad would have loved this. Can you believe it's his numbers? Can you believe it?" And I remember standing in my kitchen with tears actually running down my own face, thinking, in that moment, that this was maybe the best thing that had happened to our family since before he died. By the next morning, the story had changed. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened between that phone call and the next afternoon, because I've turned it over in my head more times than I can count, trying to be fair to whatever Denise was actually thinking. What I know for certain is this. Somewhere between midnight and noon the next day, Denise looked up what a jackpot of just over $4 million actually meant after taxes, after the lump sum reduction, after everything, a number I'll admit so much larger than any of our lazy hypothetical daydreams had ever actually pictured, that I understand, on some level, why it might have knocked something loose in a person's thinking. When she called our mother the next afternoon, the tone had shifted entirely. She said that technically, since the rest of us hadn't paid our $5 before she bought the ticket that specific week, the ticket had been purchased with her money alone, and that while she felt terrible about it, she didn't think she was legally or morally obligated to split a personal purchase 4 ways just because of what the numbers happened to be. I want to sit with that argument for a second, because on its own, stripped of everything else, it isn't actually a crazy one. People are allowed to buy their own lottery tickets. If Denise had, on a whim, bought a completely different ticket with different numbers using her own money, none of us would have had any claim to it at all, and I don't think any of us would have argued otherwise. The problem was never the abstract legal question of whose money bought that specific ticket. The problem was that the numbers weren't random. They were our father's birthday, our mother's birthday, and a wedding date, bought at the same gas station in the same weekly ritual we'd all built together for over a decade, a ritual that had never once in 12 years involved anyone individually owning a single week's numbers just because their card happened to clear first. And the problem, more specifically, was the text message sitting in our family group chat, timestamp 11:47 p.m., that said we won, in a voice I don't believe for 1 second Denise was faking. We spent about 6 weeks in a genuinely painful, mostly unspoken standoff, the kind where everyone in the family is furious, but nobody quite wants to be the one who turns unfair into lawsuit against their own sister. Denise stopped answering calls from any of us that weren't our mother. Family dinners, always a fairly reliable Sunday tradition, quietly stopped happening at all. My brother, normally the calmest person in our family by a wide margin, told me at one point that he'd started drafting an angry email to Denise roughly once a week and deleting it every single time before sending, because he genuinely didn't know what to actually do with 12 years of an unspoken family agreement that had never once been written down anywhere. I remember him saying one night on the phone, "It's $4 million, but it's not even really about the money at this point. It's that she looked me in the eye at Thanksgiving 2 months ago and said, when we went like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and now suddenly it's my ticket." I want to be honest that those 6 weeks were some of the loneliest of my adult life, in a strange, specific way I hadn't expected. It wasn't grief, exactly, but it had a similar shape, a constant, low-grade awareness that something in my family had shifted and might not shift back, alongside an equally constant uncertainty about whether pushing harder would fix it or simply finish breaking it. I found myself avoiding Denise's name in conversations with friends, not wanting to explain, not wanting to hear myself say out loud how strange and awful it felt to be genuinely unsure whether my own sister was going to keep something that belonged, in every way that mattered except one narrow technicality, to all 4 of us. What finally moved things wasn't a lawyer, at first. It was our mother, quietly going back through her own phone one evening and pulling together, without telling any of us she was doing it, a full record of 12 years of the exact same weekly payment app transactions. Memo lines that literally said things like Lotto Dollar or Friday numbers, sent like clockwork nearly every single week for over a decade, an unbroken pattern with exactly one gap. The single week in question, where 3 of our payments simply arrived a day or 2 late instead of not arriving at all. She told me later it took her almost an entire weekend, scrolling back through years of transaction history, screenshotting each one, organizing them by year in a folder on her computer she labeled, with a bluntness that made me laugh despite everything, proof. She laid all of it out on the kitchen table, next to a printed copy of Denise's own 11:47 p.m. text, and called a family meeting none of us were told the real purpose of until we were already sitting there. I remember the specific silence in that kitchen when Denise walked in and saw the papers spread across the table, her face doing something complicated and fast before settling into a kind of braced, defensive stillness. I want to be honest that even faced with all of that, Denise didn't simply fold immediately. She cried. She got defensive. She said some things about always being the one who did the actual work of buying the ticket every week for 12 years while the rest of us just tapped a button on our phones, which, I'll admit, wasn't entirely untrue and probably deserved more acknowledgement from the rest of us than we'd given her over the years. She said she'd spent 12 years never once missing a Friday, rain or shine, sick or healthy, and that some part of her had genuinely started to feel, somewhere in there, like the numbers were as much hers as anyone's simply because she was the one who'd shown up for them every single week. It wasn't a good argument for keeping the whole thing, but I understood, hearing her say it, that it wasn't purely greed either. It was 12 years of quiet, unacknowledged labor, finally looking for some kind of recognition in the worst possible way, at the worst possible moment. But faced with an unbroken 12-year pattern of transactions, 3 of our own payments that had simply arrived a couple days late rather than never at all. In her own words, sent in a moment she couldn't credibly claim wasn't genuine. The argument that this had ever been a solely individual purchase became very hard to keep making out loud, even to herself. We didn't end up needing a courtroom. A family friend who worked as a mediator, someone Denise herself, actually suggested once she'd had time to sit with everything on that kitchen table, helped us work out a split over 2 long sessions that wasn't a simple even quarter each, but wasn't Denise keeping it all either. An arrangement that gave her a genuinely larger share in recognition of 12 years of actually driving to that gas station every single week while the rest of us occasionally forgot to Venmo her on time. But that, still meaningfully, materially included the rest of us in something we'd all actually built together. It's raining tonight. The way it was raining the night, I got a text in all capital letters that changed, briefly, everything I thought I understood about my own sister. Denise and I talk again now. Carefully, the way you talk to someone after something has genuinely cracked between you and only partially reset. Family dinners happen again, though I notice, more than I used to, exactly who reaches for the check and how quickly, in a way I don't think I paid attention to before any of this happened. There's a specific kind of watchfulness that settles into a family after something like this, a low hum underneath the ordinary conversation, and I don't know if it ever fully goes away, or if we've simply gotten better at not mentioning it out loud. People ask me sometimes if I think Denise was always capable of trying to keep it deep down, the whole 12 years, quietly waiting for an excuse. I don't think that's what happened, honestly. I think a number that large does something specific and disorienting to a person's sense of what's fair, in the same way grief or fear can, and that most of us will never actually know what our own instincts would do faced with $4 million in one very convenient technicality, until the night we're the one holding the winning ticket instead of just splitting the $5. I know what mine did, that night on the phone, hearing her laugh and cry and say we over and over. I believed her completely. I still do about that specific moment. I just don't think that moment survived contact with the actual number the next morning. And I've come to believe that's a far more common, far more human failure than the version of this story where she was simply lying to us for 12 straight years. It doesn't excuse it. It just makes it feel less like a betrayal by a stranger and more like watching someone you love get quietly overwhelmed by something too big for the version of fairness we'd always taken for granted. We split the numbers evenly again the very next Friday after the settlement. The same 6 digits we played for over a decade, $5 each, sent on time, my mother making a small, pointed show of confirming everyone's payment had gone through before Denise even left for the gas station. Nobody's won since. I think, honestly, most of us are quietly relieved.